High above Baghdad, a DHL Airbus A300 bucks through the sky in violent, uneven rolls. The horizon won't stay still. Alarms stack on top of each other as the pilots fight the controls. Airspeed surges, then bleeds away. The nose climbs too steeply, then drops without warning. Inside the cockpit, nothing feels connected anymore. Outside, fire trails from the left wing, fuel streaming back into the slipstream as the aircraft staggers toward the city. They're flying over a war zone, and whatever hit them is still down there. By the fall of 2003, Iraq was still adjusting to the aftermath of the American intervention months before. The government that had run the country for decades was gone, and the road to Baghdad International Airport had already gained a reputation as one of the most dangerous stretches in the capital. The airport itself functioned under strict military control. Only supply flights, humanitarian aircraft, and a small number of contractor operations used the runways. Each flight required a strict protocol of careful timing and a climb pattern shaped by the threat from portable missiles scattered on the outskirts. On November 22nd, a DHL Airbus A300, operated by European Air Transport Leipzig, lifted off from Baghdad International Airport precisely at 9:30 a.m. local time. The flight was bound for Bahrain, a run of about 600 miles that DHL crews had been flying regularly throughout the year. The aircraft was just over 2 decades old and had recently joined the cargo fleet after a long career in passenger service, now with a paint job of the standard DHL layout, white with deep red striping. That morning, there were 3 men crewing the aircraft. First was Captain Eric Jeannot, a Belgian in his late 30s, who had more than 3,000 hours under his belt, most of them in this type. First Officer Steve Michelson, also Belgian, and also at more than 1,000 hours. Rounding it out was Scotsman Flight Engineer Mario Raphael, with an outstanding 13,000 hours of experience on a wide range of transports. At 8,000 feet, climbing through the morning sky above Baghdad, a 9K-34 Strela 3 surface-to-air missile, known to NATO forces as the SA-14 Gremlin, tore through the rear of the left wing. Suddenly, the cockpit erupted in chaos, alarms shrieking from every direction, while warning lights flashed across the panels. Captain Eric Jeannot felt the aircraft shudder beneath him, the control column going slack in his hands, while First Officer Steve Michelson tried to process the cascade of failures. Behind them, Flight Engineer Mario Raphael was already calling out the damage. Both hydraulic systems, green and yellow, had lost all pressure, and within 20 seconds, as the blue system followed, the numbers dropped to 0. With this, every crucial surface that allowed the pilots to command the aircraft, the elevators that controlled pitch, the ailerons that controlled roll, the rudder that controlled yaw, all of them went limp and trailed uselessly in the wind. Most importantly, the horizontal stabilizer, the tail surface that controlled whether the nose pointed up or down, was frozen in the climb position, with no way to adjust it. Michelson initially thought the missile had hit the rudder, but Raphael, seated behind the pilots, understood what was happening. According to him, quote, "The aircraft was like a piece of paper in the air. You could not leave your seat." Michelson keyed the radio and made the emergency call to Baghdad approach. Then Raphael took over communications to free both pilots for the flight ahead. Both Jeannot and Michelson tried the yokes, the rudder pedals, pushing and pulling, but nothing responded. The airspeed indicator, swinging wildly between 180 knots and up to 300 knots as the aircraft shook through the sky like an uncontrollable roller coaster, was their biggest concern. Jeannot's knuckles went white on the throttles, the only controls that still had any effect. Since the engines hung below the wings, adding power pushed the nose up, but then the aircraft would slow down and climb even steeper. Pushing power back dropped the nose, but that brought more speed. This maddening cycle lasted for 10 whole minutes before the pilot finally began to understand the rhythm. Now, with some measure of control restored, Jeannot pointed the nose back toward Baghdad. The first turn back toward the airport was a gradual and very slow lurching arc to the left, so that by the time the field came into sight, the altitude had dropped to 4,000 feet. Then, Jeannot called for the landing gear, knowing the airspeed was above the safe limit, but also knowing there was no choice, and Raphael unbuckled to activate the emergency gravity system, a backup that used weight instead of hydraulic pressure to force the gear down. The gear locked in the first attempt. 3 green lights appeared on the panel, and the relief in the cockpit was immediate. The drag from the extended wheels made the aircraft noticeably more stable, but the left wing was still turning, a 20-foot flame trailing behind them and eating away at the structure, spreading. Michelson suggested a long, straight-in approach to give them time to stabilize, and Junot set up for a gentle turn. Meanwhile, Raphael watched the fuel system, his hands ready to act. The outer left tank had been destroyed, the inboard tank was leaking, and if either engine quit, they were done for. Junot stabilized at 3,000 feet, while Michelson called out distance, but a crosswind pushed them right toward the shorter runway, farther from obstacles. With no guarantee where they would touch down, Junot had no choice but to commit to it and do his best. Michelson gave himself a 10 to 20% chance of survival, though the odds climbed with every foot they descended. Early in the approach, he'd reminded Junot of something critical. Pulling the power back before touchdown would doom them. The same mistake that destroyed United Airlines DC-10 over Iowa in 1989. Pilot Junot held the throttles steady as the runway filled the windscreen. The descent looked stable through 1,000 feet, but at 400 feet, a sudden gust lifted the left wing and pushed the nose toward the buildings that bordered the runways. He added power on one side and eased it on the other, trying to force the aircraft back toward level, yet the response lagged, and the roll kept building. The right wing dropped, and the first wheel struck hard, a jarring hit that shook loose panels inside the cockpit. Both pilots kept working their pedals out of instinct, reaching for controls that no longer answered. Raphael leaned forward and dragged the throttles into full reverse, hoping the engines would buy them a little space on the ground. The aircraft began slanting sideways the moment the wheels touched. Instead of tracking straight down the runway, it drifted off the concrete and into the sand beside it, wheels carving deep tracks as dust rose around them. Each bounce slammed through the fuselage, blows far beyond anything the landing gear was meant to take. Tires burst, metal scraped, and the A300 tore through a fence before at last grinding to a halt in the sand on the far side of the field. When the A300 finally came to a stop on the runway, the crew shut down the engines and moved to the escape doors. Fire crews approached while keeping a close eye on the burning left wing, since fuel was still running from the damaged lines. Then the 3 men climbed down, every single one of them without injury. With coalition cameras at the airport recording the A300 as it returned with its wing burning. That evening, when the trio was back in their hotel bar in Bahrain, the news footage about what they'd just been through came onto CNN. According to Michelson, quote, "In the morning we were just freighter pilots. That evening, a Lockheed C-5 test pilot from Andrews Air Force Base wanted to shake our hands." For their efforts, Captain Eric Junot, First Officer Steve Michelson, and Flight Engineer Mario Raphael were credited with saving the aircraft and their own lives under conditions that allowed very little margin. Following the incident, many insurgent groups claimed responsibility, and foreign operators adjusted their expectations for any flight in or out of Baghdad. A French documentary team near the perimeter filmed the aircraft overhead with fuel streaming from the damaged wing. Most shockingly, a journalist reported receiving a separate tape that showed a missile launch by masked fighters, and though the recording matched what investigators already knew, it was never released in full.